Greetings, my name is Hannah Veerkamp. I am the Creative Experience Resource Specialist at St. Louis Public Library, and I'm coming to you from the recording room at Central Library. And before we get started, we'll talk about the audio applications today and some of the pros and cons of each one and why you might use them for a particular project. So the important thing to think about first, whether it offers multi-track recording capabilities. We have 2 microphones available in this room, and if you wanted to be doing an interview or harmonizing with somebody, something like that at the same time, you would need an application that supports multi-track recording. You also might think about whether the application supports MIDI. MIDI is what we use to give sound to the electronic keyboard that we have available in this room. So, unlike a synthesizer, this keyboard doesn't have its own sounds built in, and so you need to use it with a software that can tell it what to sound like. And so if you anticipate wanting to use the keyboard or doing electronic music, there are certain applications that are best for those. We're not going to be focusing on those as much in this tutorial because the main goal of this tutorial is to get you comfortable recording your voice and getting good sound levels. And so I'm going to be focusing on software that is the best for those applications, and I'll mention a little bit about each one. But I do want to also tell you about the MIDI capabilities, and we will do a little bit with that today as well. So the audio software that we have available here is kind of in this area. So we have Pro Tools, which is an industry standard, and it has the capability to both record voice and have multi-track recording, and also offers MIDI capabilities. So we'll be using this one today, and the same basic things that we are doing apply for any of the software, but we'll just use this one today because it has a lot of capabilities. Another common software is Adobe Audition. And so if you're familiar with the Adobe Creative Suite, which is all of these applications that kind of look like chemistry elements, if you're familiar with Photoshop or Premiere Pro, these are all bundled together in the same subscription fee. So people that have access to one of those have access to all of them. They also have a similar interface. So if you're used to using certain applications like that, you may like to use Audition. Audition is a really capable software for any kind of vocal recording, whether it is music or podcasting audio. It can record multi-track recording, but a limitation about it is that it does not support MIDI, so you cannot use the keyboard with it. Audacity is a great free program, and the really nice thing about this is that it's open source and you can use it at home on any platform, whether it's PC, Mac, or Linux. It's really easy to use to record, but it does have some limitations. First, it does not support multi-track recording, so you can add tracks and you can record one vocal track and then add music to it and layer them on, but you can't record with 2 microphones at the same time. And another limitation is that it also does not support MIDI. So we also have FL Studio. This is our most popular music for beat making and for some other types of electronic music production. It's really great for that stuff. It does have the capability to record vocals in it, but it's intended to be more of a sampler, so you can't do multi-track vocal recording and you don't have as much control over the vocals in that. So we won't be using that one today, but it's a great one to create backing tracks. And the nice thing about any of these programs is that they can be used together. You can create a beat in FL and then export it and then import it into any of the more robust audio programs like Pro Tools or Audacity or Audition, and then sing or rap over that if you wanted to do that, or add it to the background of your podcast, that sort of thing. So that's a very popular software. It's available. And then Ableton Live is also another great one for recording electronic music. It's got a lot of great virtual instruments. It's intended for live performance. Obviously, we don't do that here in the studio, but it has a lot of great capabilities for that. It does have the option to record vocals as well, but it is not focused as much for that application. And so I prefer to use Pro Tools, Audition or Audacity when I'm doing primarily vocal recording. Studio One is another one that's kind of an all-around robust program, and it would also be good for both vocal recording and MIDI recording. So choosing those applications is a little bit of exploration. They all kind of do the same thing, but they all have their own peculiarities about the way the interface looks and where you find things. So once you're familiar with one, it makes it a lot easier to learn any of them, but it's just one of those things that you need to take a little bit of time and just come in here and explore and see what your preferences are. I do want to point out that while we're using Pro Tools today, if you need more information about any of the specific software, we have this orange binder here in the recording room, and it has basic step-by-step instructions for all of the different software. And so that will help you practice using some of the other ones as well. I will also talk about other resources for continuing education later on in the program. Okay, so we will start by opening Pro Tools, which is this little purple icon right here. Just going to double click. Sometimes it takes just a minute for it to open. Once Pro Tools opens, you have this screen where you can add a title. I'm just going to leave it called Untitled right now, but this is where you would name your session. And these defaults should be good. If you know that you're going to be creating audio for video in particular, you could change this sample rate to 48 kilohertz, which is a standard for video, but 44.1 is a standard for most audio applications. The default saving location is a folder on the desktop called Patron Projects, and the recommended workflow for Pro Tools in particular is to save your audio to that folder and then drag it onto your hard drive or to your flash drive or upload it to the cloud at the end, and we'll talk about how to do that. You could change this location and save it directly to your device, but you may experience some lagging with the program because it requires a lot of processing power, and if that's the case, you may want to go back to working directly from the desktop. So we'll leave those set, and then we'll just push create, and then the program opens. All of the audio software are a little bit different in terms of how they're set up, but they all pretty much do the same thing. In Pro Tools in particular, we need to create tracks that we want the program to record onto. And so we'll do that by going up to track. I'm going to click on that and then do new. The default is a mono audio track, which is what we're going to want for using these microphones. There's only one sound source, so they're mono and they are audio. So we have 2 microphones here. I'm actually going to create 3 audio tracks. You can do that by changing this 1 to a 3, just typing 3 in there, because I want to show you something with that. I'm also going to set up a track that we can use to record MIDI on, because we're going to do a demo of a little bit of MIDI with the keyboard at the end of this session. So to add additional other tracks, I'm going to do click on there, and then I'm going to leave that one. I'm going to change this one to stereo. You could use either for MIDI. And then instead of audio, you see we have these choices. And there is MIDI, which you might think would be the right one to use. But if I chose MIDI, it would require me to do some more routing setup to tell it where to get the sound. I'm going to, in this case, choose instrument track. And in this case, this means virtual instrument. And it's nice because the software has it already set up to take that from the MIDI controller, our keyboard. We'll leave it as ticks. So just again, this is Pro Tools in particular, but remember that when we're using the MIDI keyboard, we use instrument track. If we wanted to have an actual physical instrument, like a guitar or something like that, that was plugged in directly into the audio interface, then we would still choose audio track for that. So in this case, we've got 3 mono audio tracks. We've got 1 stereo instrument track, and then I'm just going to push create. And so they show here. So we have all of these tracks here. And then if I want, I can go in here and kind of just drag these apart a little bit to give me a little bit more room. I'm just using the mouse and clicking near there. So in order to record onto these tracks, I'm just going to drag this over here so we can see this screen a little bit more. In order to record onto these tracks, we have to record enable. So each of these tracks has a button that if I click on it will push red. So I'm going to click on this one, and now you can see that the microphone that I'm speaking into is getting sound into the system. So you can see that it's coming in right there. Now, if I click on audio 2, it should be picking up the other microphone. And so it's across the room, so you're not seeing as much input, but if I clap, it gets over there. You can see that it's picking up some sound too. I added a third audio track because I wanted to show you that if I click on there, there's no input coming, and that is because we only have 2 mics connected. And so if I wanted to record onto another track, and the reason why I might do this, I wouldn't be doing this at the same time, but say I recorded something and then wanted to come back and add another layer, add harmonies, just do any additional tracks, I would need to tell it what microphone to pick up sound from. So I'm going to go ahead and stop these right now. And I want to point out that this one, this is a particular quirk to Pro Tools, but all of the audio software has some way of assigning microphones, and you want to know which microphone you're using in which situation. So in Pro Tools, each new track automatically assigns it to consecutive inputs on and on, even though we only have 2 mics. So audio 1 goes to input 1, that's the first mic that on the left. Audio 2 goes to input 2, that's the next interface and the microphone on the right. Audio 3 would go to that third interface that there's nothing plugged into it. So if I wanted to record onto audio 3, I could still click on here, and all I'd have to do is go to the input and then change it to interface and change to one of the ones that are highlighted. So in this case, I'm going to change it to the one I'm speaking into, and then you can see that it is recording here as well. So since we don't need that track for now, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it. I just wanted to show you how to change the inputs if you need to, because that is a troubleshooting thing, that if you're not getting sound, to make sure that the track you're trying to record on has an input that actually has a microphone. So you'll want to check that. So I want to delete one of these tracks. Since I made these all together, you can see that they're all highlighted together. And if I were to delete them, they would delete everything. So I have to use the control button and click on them to separate. And then now I'm going to click onto audio 3 and just right click and do delete. So that gets me back to just 2 tracks for the 2 microphones we have and this instrument track that we will use later. Okay, so I want to cut away from the screen recording for a moment to show you the hardware in the room. So we're going to start with talking about the microphones that we have available in this room. The audio may change a little bit because I'm using the microphone to record into, so as I move a little bit away from it, you may hear a difference in the audio quality, but I'll try to speak loudly. So this is the Yeti Pro microphone that we're using. Now this microphone is similar to the microphones that you may have seen outside at what we call the pods in Creative Experience. The difference is that this microphone has an analog connection. So these are XLR cables, and it has the option to connect using those into an interface right here. This is the interface, rather than in just to a USB connection like at the pods. And so I want to show you a few things about these mics first of all. And so these are the mics that are specific to Central. Now, if you are at Barr, those microphones are a little bit different, and I'll talk about them in a minute. But the important thing about these particular microphones is that you talk into the front of them. You can tell it's the front because there's a light and it's hanging downwards, or with the other microphone, it is upright. So now I want to turn onto the back of the microphone, and you're going to notice that my voice will get a little bit quieter because I have this microphone set up as a cardioid microphone, which is intended to pick up the sound in a directional pattern. And so let me show you the different options on the back. And this is upside down, but you can see that there's these things called a pattern. And so there's this little tiny heart-shaped pattern, and then there's a circle pattern. I'm going to turn back around to the front so I can speak to you better so that you can hear it. The heart-shaped pattern is called cardioid, and it picks up in a directional pattern. So it's going to pick up at about a 30-degree angle in the front of the microphone. The circle pattern is called an omnidirectional pattern, and it's going to pick up sound all around the microphone. So let me just switch that. So now, even though I'm standing behind the microphone, my voice is picking up the sound. And so the difference between those are what you want to use for a single voice or more than one voice. There are also 2 stereo settings on the far end that you'll notice. We don't have it set up to use those in this room. And the reason why is because, for one, you would need to attach another cable. It would take up our inputs. And for 2, in my experience, they don't have as good of sound for more than one voice. They're hard to get a good quality sound with. So we just leave it simple and use the cardioid or the omnidirectional. The reason why you would want to use the cardioid instead of the omnidirectional is because the cardioid cuts down on the noise. The omnidirectional picks up sound all around the microphone, but the trade-off is that you're also picking up more noise. So I switched it back to the cardioid setting, which is why you can't hear me as well in the back. Now I'm looking at it from the front of the microphone, and you can hear me much more clearly. Do you notice that difference? Okay, I wanted to show you one last thing on the back though, so I'm going to turn it back around. There's one more knob on there that you'll see, and that says gain. The gain for the microphone is fairly straightforward. That is the recording level, and that would be simple enough if that were the only knob that you needed to worry about. And when we're out at the pods with those USB microphones, that is the only knob that you need to worry about for setting levels. But in this situation, we have to use that in tandem with the interface. So you can see that the microphones, we have 2 microphones, are plugged in to the interface, and we have input 1 and input 2, which correspond to those ones that we saw in Pro Tools. Now you'll notice that in the middle of there is this button right here that says 48 volts. And that is essentially functions as a power button for these microphones. That is what's called phantom power, and it's a power boost for sensitive electronic microphones that are called condenser microphones, which is the type of microphone that we have. Certain other microphones, like dynamic microphones, which is a different type of microphone that is made from magnets instead of electronic insides, does not need that power button, and so you wouldn't want to push it for that. If you wanted to plug in an electric guitar or something like that into this interface, you wouldn't use that either. And so it's important to know whether you need that or not. But for these microphones in Creative Experience at Central, in particular, the Yeti microphones, you have to have that push in order to get sound into the microphone. And so that is a common troubleshooting thing. If you're not getting sound, check to make sure that that button is pushed. And note that there's one button in between the pair of microphones. If you look over, there's another pair right here, and it's not turned on because I don't have anything plugged into it. So you have to have a pair that have the same needs for that. So you'll notice that these are what's called dual inputs. So you can see that there's a big outer ring where this type of plug, the XLR, would fit. You could also plug in a 1/4-inch plug into the inside of that. And so that would be if you wanted to plug in an electric guitar or something like that directly into that. And then you'll see that on top of each of these mics, you have these gain controls as well. And so there is a knob there for each of the microphones, and then there's also the knob on the back of the microphone itself. And so you need to use those in tandem, and we're going to talk about getting good levels in a minute. We're going to go back to looking at the software, but a good rule of thumb to start in here, and it varies a little bit if you have a really loud voice or a really quiet voice, but a good rule of thumb to start is that I start with the control on the back of the microphone at halfway, and then I start with these controls all the way low and then slowly raise them until we get the right level. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about next, is how to do that. But the adjustments that I'm going to be making on the physical hardware are to these knobs, and you won't see that when I'm showing you the screen recording. So I just want you to know that that is the knob that I'm controlling. I set the control on the microphone to halfway to start, and then I make my adjustments on the interface. All right, the other things I want to show you on here are the headphones and playback monitor. And so you see that there are two headphone controls. They each have their own volume, and there are two pairs of headphones. The volume for the headphones is purely for comfort and for what sounds good to you. It doesn't affect the levels that get, I like to say, baked into the recording. That's what the gain is. The gain is the input levels that has to do with what is permanently embedded into the recording. This is just how we hear it. When you have a loud gain going in, it is going to sound louder. So as I raise the gain, I'm going to need to adjust my headphone level just for comfort, but that doesn't affect anything in the final output of the recording. So I just like to make that distinction. Now, this big silver button that says monitor, that's for playing it back on the speakers. You never want to have those turned on while you are recording, or you'll get feedback and it sounds terrible. So just listen to the recording with the headphones on. If you're recording at Barr, the microphones are a little bit different. They have a dynamic microphone there, and so it won't have the same input settings as we do in the recording room here. You won't use the phantom power button, and you will speak into the end of the microphone rather than into the side address. So if you're viewing this at Barr, that would be a little bit different. You don't need the phantom power button, and you speak into the end of the microphone. Okay, so we will come back to the screen recording now, and I want to demonstrate how to record your voice and to test the levels. And it's going to be a little bit tricky doing that with this screen recording application. What you're going to hear is actually the recording that the screen is making, not Pro Tools itself, but I will save the recording in Pro Tools and play that back when I share this video so that you can actually hear the sound from the application as well. But we will start by, we're going to use the mic that I'm speaking into, which is Audio 1 that I showed you. And so we will record enable that here. And now you see that we're getting levels into the application. I can hear myself on my headphones. As I said, I'm using the headphones to monitor rather than the loudspeakers so we don't get feedback. So I have this ready to go. And then in order to start actually recording, this is record enabling it. Then I have to use these buttons up here. This is called the transport. So those of us that remember old tape recorders, these may be familiar. The red button is for record. The green triangle is play. The square is to stop. And another good shortcut to know is that the space bar is great for stopping and starting. And that actually works in a lot of different audio programs. And so we'll go ahead, and in order to start recording, we have to push record and then play. So we push record and then play. And then now you can see that this is starting to record in here, and it's creating a waveform. So I can see how visually my recording looks. And so when I'm testing the levels, I'm both listening and looking to try to get a good recording level. I'll play it back so you can hear how it sounds later, but for now, you will hear the difference when I raise the gain too. But look at the way that the waveform looks as well. Right now, you can see a nice clear highs and lows on there. And when we get it too high, it starts to flatten out, and it's called clipping because it actually clips off the top of the waveform, and that is what distortion looks like. And so I want to both look and listen to try to get a good level. So this is actually probably a pretty good level for me. I'm going to turn down the gain on the interface all the way so you can tell that it got a little bit quieter there, and you can see that waveform is much smaller now. And then I'm going to slowly adjust this level as I talk to you. So I'm going to go ahead and slowly raising a little bit. That's about to where I was before, and that's at about 9 o'clock, something like that. That's actually even maybe a little bit loud for me. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and exaggerate it. I'm going to make it way too loud, and I'm going to have to turn down my headphone volumes as I do this so that it doesn't blow my eardrums out. But it may be uncomfortable in the recording. You might want to pull away your headphones if you're listening to it for a minute. So I'm going to raise it. And so you can see and hear that this sounds really terrible. And I know you can hear that in the program as well. And you can see that it's flattened off like that. So I'm going to lower this down just so it's not terrible to hear. But I'm going to lower it down to back to about where it was. And I'm raising my headphone volume as I do that, so it's back to being comfortable for me. So if you see that place in the waveform where it's completely flattened off like that, that is what distortion looks like. It's called clipping because it looks like the top of the waveform actually got clipped off. Now, you can also hear kind of a distorted sound when I actually adjust the gain. So you want to find a spot that is pretty good and just leave it there. And then, so ideally you want to find a spot so that you can accommodate somebody getting loud, somebody laughing, and just, it can be enough headroom to accommodate the highs and the lows like that. Why wouldn't you just turn the gain really low? So the thing about that is that if you do have to err on the side of too high or too low, it's better to have it too low, but you don't want to have it too low because then it ends up having to raise up all of the noise when you turn up the volume too. And so when you have distortion in there, why can't you just fix that in post? Because it actually has changed the waveform itself. This is what I'm calling kind of baked into the recording itself. And so you can lower that sound, but it's just going to have lower sounding distortion. Or you can raise a really quiet sound, but it's going to raise up the noise floor too. So the best thing that you can do, whether you're doing podcasts, whether you're doing music, any kind of vocal recording, the best thing you can do to improve the quality of your work is to get good sound levels to begin with. And so I recommend that whenever you're going to do a recording, you do a sound test like this. So you'll do this recording and then you'll stop and then you'll play it back. And so I'm going to go back in here and we'll just play some of this back. And so I'm going to start at the beginning so that I can try to line it up. And then I'm going to have to add the Pro Tools recording back into here to be able to play it together. So you'll hear the actual Pro Tools recording. So I'm going to go ahead and just let this play. And then now you can see that this is starting to record in here and it's creating a waveform. So I can see how visually my recording looks. And so when I'm testing the levels, I'm both listening and looking to try to get a good recording level. So I'm going to raise it. And so you can see and hear that this sounds really terrible. I'm going to lower it down to back to about where it was. And I'm raising my headphone volume as I do that, so it's back to being comfortable for me. So if you see that place in the waveform where it's completely flattened off like that, that is what distortion looks like. It's called clipping because it looks like the top of the waveform actually got clipped off. So we'll stop there, but you get the idea. So what I would recommend is that anytime that you're setting up for a recording, you do a sound check like this. You test it, you listen back, you try to get a good adjustment. You don't want to be riding the volume knob, so you want to just find something that can kind of accommodate what you're doing. It's important to do a test with each guest that's speaking. And when you're recording yourself, proximity matters. So if you know that you're going to get really loud, you can kind of practice getting back a little bit further from the mic or getting closer, and you hear that I'm getting louder. But you can't expect a guest to do that. So you need to find kind of a sweet spot that can accommodate everything. It's important to do your mic check with the same type of recording that you're doing. So if you're doing an interview, you will want to do a test with questions and talking and that sort of thing like I did. If you're doing singing, you'll want to do that. And singing is a little trickier because it has a much wider dynamic range between the quiets and the louds. And so you want to make sure you get some of those both and make sure that you get a recording that can accommodate some of the really loud sounds, but still sounds good when it's a little bit on the quiet side. And if you're doing rap, you want to record that. So you just want to do the test with the person and the type of recording that you'll be doing. And you just want to go through and you want to make sure to record with your headphones and then go back and listen to it. Ideally, you want to listen to it on the loudspeakers as well as the headphones so you hear how it sounds and just make sure that you like the sound quality before you get started. Once you get familiar with using the space, you'll kind of get an idea of where the settings are for you. It varies a little bit with the different programs too, but you always want to do this test. I always recommend just doing a test and practicing. And so this is a great way to get started learning how to use the equipment. Just come in here and practice and do the mic test. I want to point out this little red right here. This shows that at some point in this recording, there has been distortion, which clearly it was right here. So I can just click that right there to get rid of it. But that just gives you a little warning that somewhere in the recording it got too loud. So again, we want to be looking and we want to be listening both. And this applies to most of the programs that we have in here. There is a caveat I will tell you for Audacity. And Audacity, there's a known issue with Audacity that when you're using the interface with the microphone, there is a delay in the monitoring and in the time that it takes back to get to your headphones. And it is enough of a delay that it makes it really distracting and hard to hear yourself recording. And so for Audacity, we have disabled the monitoring so that you're not trying to listen to yourself a half a second later while you're recording. It just doesn't work. And so for that program, you won't be listening with headphones. You'll just be recording. It's still important to have the volume turned all the way down on the monitor, but you won't be able to monitor while you're recording. You're just looking at the waveform and recording. And so in that program, it makes it even that much more important to make sure that you go back and play it back and make sure that nothing sounded too distorted or loud or quiet, and that you get the level that you want before you do your final recording. So I recommend just coming and practicing recording and getting the levels right before you do anything else. Another thing I should have mentioned is that we can turn this enable button off when we're actually monitoring it. You don't need to have that on to playback, and it's better if you don't because you'll kind of hear it through the microphone and it colors the sound a little bit. So I did want to show you how to use the MIDI recorder in Pro Tools just so that you have that option available to play with. And this is something that you can spend hours of time geeking out on. So I'm going to run through this really quick and you're going to want to come back and explore this more on your own time. But in this track that we have created, the instrument track, it's important that it's an instrument track. You're going to click in this middle insert. So the first one in this gray column in the middle, and we're going to click on there and we're going to go to multi-channel plugin and then down to instrument. Incidentally, on your vocal tracks, this is where you would add effects if you wanted to. So we're not going to get into that today, but if you wanted to add EQ, reverb, that sort of thing, they're here under your plugins too. For now, we're going to go down to instrument and we are going to choose one. We'll start with the piano. So we're just going to go to this mini grand and you'll see that it brings up this piano, and I don't think you'll be able to hear it because you're not listening through headphones, but I can hear a sound when I'm playing it right now, but I can't hear a sound yet on the actual keyboard. So what I need to do to get the sound into the program is that I record enable it. And now when I play the piano, you could see sound coming in there. And so in order to get it into the timeline, I'm going to again push record and play. Now you'll notice when I first do this, it's playing my track up above. So I'm going to pause it for a moment and I'm just clicking on that and deleting it, going back to rewind to the beginning. These S and M buttons here are for solo and mute. So mute would mean that I mute this track, and that's what I'm going to do. Solo is just the opposite, and it's convenient if you have more than one recording going on at the same time. That way, if I solo this, it automatically mutes the other tracks. So I can do that, and this way I don't hear this track that I'm recording with. On the other hand, if you wanted to have a musical track and then you wanted to record over it, you wouldn't want to mute that track. So I'm going to just put this back at the beginning, and then I have this recorded here. I'm going to push record and play, and then I'm going to play something on the piano, and I am not a great piano player. All right, so I will stop it with the space bar now. So I just recorded this, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off this record button. I'm going to play this back over the loudspeakers, and this will be picking up in the microphone, so it's not going to sound too great, but you'll get an idea of how it sounds. I'm just going to go back to here, and I'm going to turn the loudspeakers up. So that is how it sounded with the piano. The coolest thing about MIDI, you'll see that this is electronic information, so it looks really different than the waveform already. If I double click on here, and then if I go in here, and if I start to zoom in, if I zoom in here, you can start to see that these are the sounds, these correspond to here, and you can control how long they last. If I played a note right and didn't like it, I can just move it around. So there's a lot you can do, and we're not going to get too much into that, but I just want to show you that so that you can go back and play with it. The really cool thing is that even after you've recorded, you can change the instrument. So normally you would put the instrument here, but since there is already an instrument in, I just go over to the instrument here that it recorded on. I click on grand. I go back through the plug explore all these different ones. I want to show you this expand. So now this has 4 different inputs that you can put virtual instruments in at the same time. And so this one that's already loaded is a thing called Beneath the Waves. So if I play this back already, it's going to have this sound. So already it's changed it a whole bunch. There's so many different instruments you can choose. I'm just going to randomly select, and you can put 4 in at the same time. I'm just going to select a bunch of different ones, and we can just see how it sounds with all of these. So now I play back. And I can turn certain ones off and on. And it's just fun to play with that. I'm going to go ahead and turn the microphone back. And then, of course, if I took the solo button off and played these back together, you'd be hearing this sound and this sound together at the same time. I'm not going to go over editing and mixing in this tutorial because I'm not able to share my computer sound with you while I do that in this screen recording application. And so it's going to be hard to show you exactly what I'm doing. But I will just mention briefly that a lot of the editing functions are copy and paste and similar controls that may be familiar for word processing, and that's true of almost all of the audio and video software. So the shortcuts are up here, but on this PC, Control X or Command X on a Mac for cut, Control C, copy, etc. So you also have the option to kind of drag the ends like this. I do want to briefly show you this super tool that I have selected because it's something that I really like about this program, but can be frustrating if you don't know what you're doing. So if you look at my cursor closely, you'll notice these are all selected. These are all different tools. So if I unselect them from outside, this is something that allows me to highlight areas that I might want to cut and paste. And so you get that kind of I-beam. This one allows me to move it around. And then this one allows me to trim the end. And the nice thing about this program and most of them is that they're non-destructive, which means that I could cut something down and then decide that I wanted it longer after all and just stretch it back, which is really nice. When I'm talking about copy and pasting, what I'm saying is that I could just highlight an area and then I'm going to go Control C and then Control V and move it over there. And my favorite, Control Z, undoes everything. So we'll do that. But then you have to go back and forth. If I want to move it, then I have to go back up here. And it takes a little while to go back and forth between those tools. So if I select outside of here, then I have what's called the super tool. And it's really nice because it allows me to do all of those functions at a time if I know what I'm doing. So just you have to pay close attention to what the cursor's doing. So when I'm in the top of the waveform, I get this I-beam that I can kind of select things. When I'm in the bottom of the waveform, I get this hand that I can move things. When I'm near the side, I get this little bracket that I can move things in and out. I can trim with, and then I get a couple of additional things. So if I'm up in the top corner, I get a fade. And if I had two clips right beside each other, I would get an option to fade them to do a crossfade. So you can play with all of that kind of editing. You can play with mixing, changing the volume. You can adjust the whole volume levels right here. And there are also additional ways. I'm just going to throw a couple things out very quickly, but you're going to want to find more information for how to do these. If I click on this little thing, I get a line for the volume, and I can just use the control button here and put different toggles on here, different keyframes, and this allows me to drag them and move them and make the sound go up and down. So this is, I've just created a fade in here. I'm going to Control Z to undo all of that, just so that you know that those are there and you can come back to play with them. And I will tell you where to find more learning resources in a moment. Before that, though, I want to go over saving because this is important, and there's a couple of particular features about saving this in a form that you can play it back. There's a distinction to be noted of when you're saving it in a program so that you can come back and work on it. First, this is saving as a Pro Tools file. So this allows me to come back, change the instruments in MIDI, make all those edits, do things like that. And it's really useful if you have space to go ahead and save it like that, because you never know if you're going to want to come back to it. So that's just Control S, just again, word processing commands. And then I also need to get it into a form that I can play it on my phone, or I can share by email, I can upload to the computer, I can put on SoundCloud, any of those things. So I'm going to need either an MP3 or a WAV file. The difference there is that the WAV file is a higher quality file, but it also takes up more space. An MP3 is a more compressed file, but it's also a standard that we're used to on most of our phones. All podcasts are saved as MP3. So if you have space, you can do both. If you save the original Pro Tools files, you could always come back later and do it. If you know that you're podcasting, for instance, you know you're going to need an MP3, you could go ahead and save it like that. Depending on the program that you're working in, some of the programs call it exporting. Pro Tools in particular is a little quirky and calls it bounce. So first we need to make sure that the cursor is at the very beginning of the waveform. So we're going to select like this. And otherwise, if I knew that I only wanted this first part, I could just select that, and then I would only be bouncing that part. And in fact, I think that that's what I'm going to do for this time. If I knew that I wanted to play the whole thing, I could go down here and just play it from there. So we're going to select this right now, and I only want this part. I want to make sure that nothing is muted or soloed unless that's how I want it to be, because if I only had this soloed, it wouldn't mix it together and I wouldn't hear the vocals in it. So I want to make sure that that's like that. And then I go up here to File, Bounce to Disk. And so this gives a similar setup to where we started at the beginning. It has these same parameters. You can change the name if you want. You can change the directory if you want. And I'm going to go ahead and save it to the Patron project file again. And then if you want to add an MP3, you can. So we're going to add that. Offline means that it goes much faster. It used to be that it did it in real time. So if you had an hour-long radio program, for instance, would have to wait an hour for it to bounce. Now with this offline option, it goes much quicker. So I recommend keeping that on. And then we click bounce, and then this gives you metadata option, and this is what you would want to do if you were creating a podcast. You could also do information for an album if you want. I'm just gonna let that go for now. And then see, it did that very quickly. And so I'm going to go ahead and close this program now. It's going to ask me if I want to save it. Say sure, even though I already did it. And I just want to show you the folder where it saved this. So you see, this is the Patron Projects folder. Now, when we set it up at the beginning, it created this recording room orientation folder as soon as I typed that in. What we didn't know is that it created all this other information in it as well. And when we bounce these files, they just went here. So this is the MP3, this is the wave sound. Now, it's important if you're going to save this stuff, this is the actual Pro Tools file, but it won't work unless it's reading all of this information. So it's very important that if you save this to come back to later, that you save the whole thing. So you want to go back here and make sure that you save this entire outside folder. So I also have a flash drive set up right now. So I'm going to go, the easiest thing is to open a separate window. And I'm going to go to this actually hard drive that I have here set up. And I'm going to just drag this onto my hard drive. You could put it in another folder if you wanted, something like that. And then I'll have that here. And so the proper workflow would be that next time I came to the recording room, I could plug this in and then drag this onto the desktop and work from there and then drag it back. I could also try working directly from my drive, but if it had any lag time, it might be because the hard drive is not fast enough to keep up with the program. So another option would be to save to a Google Drive or OneDrive or Dropbox, something like that on the cloud. And that's perfectly fine too. One thing that I want to point out about that is that sometimes files get corrupted when there's a large file going to the cloud. So if you're going to save it to cloud storage, I would recommend the additional step of zipping the drive. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to right click and go send to compressed zipped folder. And so then this compresses this. And so you see it has this one with a little zip folder. And then that is what I would upload to the cloud. So I would go into my Google Drive and upload this and then make sure it's completely uploaded. And then when I wanted to come back and work on it again, I would download it and then I would double click this and then drag it out onto the desktop so that I have it outside of the zipped folder, work from that, and then upload it again, zip it again and upload it again. And when you're doing that, you may want to make sure to rename the version so that you don't have a bunch of folders and get confused about which one is which. So this is a good time to mention some of the additional learning resources that we have available. So one great resource, if we go to our library website, under digital content, we have a lot of different options, and I'll go to online learning. Under here, Creative Bug, Gale Courses, and lynda.com all have great resources. Lynda.com in particular is a great resource for video tutorials that will show you how to do any kind of software subject, or you can search by recording, you can search by Pro Tools, anything like that. The great thing about doing this with your library card is that you don't have to pay for the subscription. So access it through our website. Again, on the library's website, you can find information for a Tech Connect form. So we can go down here to the virtual Tech Connect, and you can use that to submit a request to learn all kinds of more information. So thank you very much for viewing this tutorial. I hope that it was helpful, and I hope you have a great day.